Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SmartBiz Advisors. This is the podcast where we provide small business owners with the tools and insights they need to succeed. I'm your host, John Jones, and with me, as always, is my good friend and colleague, Mr. Mark Fackrell. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, John. Nice to talk to you as always.
Indeed. So, welcome, everyone. Today, we are diving into a crucial topic that affects every small business, and that is effective cash flow management. We're going to discuss its importance, strategies to maintain a healthy cash flow, and the tools you can use to streamline the process. So, let's get started. Mark, you are an accountant. You have done this kind of thing for 20 years. Start us out. Help us to begin to understand what is cash flow from a business standpoint.
Sure. Thanks for that, John. Cash flow is the most important aspect of any business. I mean, we've all heard the expression cash is king, and it's
Yeah.
true. It's true for every business. It's especially true for small businesses, right? When you're starting out, you've got, to basically keep the thing going. And so cash
Mhm.
flow is the way that we keep a business operating.
Okay.
There's a whole variety of different options of, financing businesses and things like that. But your day-to-day cash flow it determines the health of your business, and it determines that you can keep going, that you can pay the bills.
Okay. Okay. So what does cash flow refer to? What is it? What is it? What is its meaning specifically?
So specifically, it's how much money you have coming in the door and how much money you're spending out every month. And it's where you're going it's what you're spending your money on. It's the
Hmm.
sources that the money is coming from. You obviously want to be in a situation where you're maximizing the cash that comes in the door and you're minimizing the
Hmm.
cash that goes out the door. And then you want to be able to build
Hmm.
a process that repeats upon that, right? So you want to be in a situation where every month you're increasing your cash inflows and you're, uh, maybe holding steady or decreasing or at least not growing as fast your cash outflows.
Okay. So I've heard, things cut. There's positive cash flow. There's negative cash flow. So does that mean if you have positive, you're making money, and negative, you're losing money, or is there
Yep.
more to it?
Nope, it's just that simple.
Okay. Okay. So, but are there scenarios or situations where a company may have negative cash flow at, at a time that's acceptable?
So one thing that's important to distinguish is your operating cash flow, right? So operating cash flow is your ongoing, it's what you're generating in revenue every month. It's what you're spending every month for, to make the business operate and run.
Okay. Yeah.
So, instances where you're making an investment to the business that is taking cash that is going to grow the business would be an example of a situation where, you
Hmm.
actually do have negative cash flow, but
Hmm.
it's coming because you're investing in the business, not because you're running the business
Okay.
inefficiently or
Okay.
unprofitably.
Okay.
So, say I've got to go spend $50,000 to build out my website. That's obviously you're going to have, depending on the size of the business, you're going to have negative cash flows when you're spending that money. But it's
Yeah.
done with the purpose of growing the business in the future.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so it's important. So this is kind of one of the things where we
Yes.
talk about,
Yeah.
record keeping and stuff like that. Is it's important to be able to understand the differences between these things so that you can say, okay, I did have negative cash flow this month, but it's because I was reinvesting into the business, not because I was performing poorly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's pretty clear. Now tell us, if you can, what's the importance of cash flow management? What do our listeners need to know about cash flow? What are the give us a list. What is the importance of it?
So there's really three things that is important about this. One is it's like I talked about operational efficiency.
Okay.
The second is your ability to grow and expand your business.
Okay.
The third item I would say is credit, credit worthiness. And then the
Okay.
fourth would be crisis management.
Okay. Okay. So
So just a little rundown on
yeah.
those four things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Operational efficiency. This is what I've spent most of the time already talking about. It allows you to judge how well the operation is going. Am I profitable? Am I doing
Okay.
things that is generating more cash than it's costing me? It's pretty that's I think pretty common sense and pretty
Hmm.
straightforward. And that's what allows people to be able to see, is my business doing the things that it needs to be just from an operational
Hmm.
standpoint to be a viable company.
Hmm. Okay.
So assuming that your business is profitable and you're performing efficiently and you're generating cash flow, then what that's going to do is it's going to kind of feed into the next part, and that's the growth and the expansion.
Okay.
So once you've built up sufficient cash reserves, then you can go and you can make investments back into the business. You can automate things that you were doing manually. That's a situation where you should be saving money.
Hmm.
So you and I have been working on a different venture where
Hmm.
we will be able to replace a person with a process that's been automated. So rather than have to pay this person $35,000 a year, we can spend $20,000 building this automated process up front, but then I don't have that cost anymore. So
Sure.
that's a situation where you make a larger investment now, but it saves you costs in the long run.
Okay.
And if you identify a situation where, I mean, that's a good example, is that situation that might even make sense for you to borrow money, right? Because if it's going to save you money over the long term, it's probably better for me to spend that money up front.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Definitely can see that. Okay.
So,
So
the next two line items that I kind of rattled off there are credit worthiness. This is, and that
yeah,
kind of just feeds into what I was just talking about there is,
exactly.
if you're managing your business effectively and
Uh-huh.
your operations are generating a profit, then that's going to create a situation where banks or investors are going to be more willing to be able to lend you money so that you can make those investments into the
Yeah.
business.
Okay.
And that's part of the importance of the record keeping, is you want to be able to show the bank or the investor, okay, I did lose money in February, but here's the reasons, because I invested in this. So that's the credit worthiness aspect of your cash flow.
Okay.
The final thing
Yeah.
is something that kind of, it's something that nobody wants to deal with, but we all do as small business owners have to deal with, and that is crisis management.
Yes.
You want your business to be able to generate sufficient cash flow from its routine operations so that when something bad comes along, you've got the ability to withstand a storm.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine a small business without a crisis.
It is hard to imagine that.
Yeah, they seem to pop up all the time. So, all right. So we have already talked about what cash flow is and then why it's important. Let's talk about some strategies to maintain positive cash flow. What are your what are your top recommendations for maintaining positive cash flow?
So this kind of goes back to another topic that we've talked about before, and that is budgeting, right?
Okay.
So budgeting's got
Budget.
it's got really two different components. It's taking the historical part of where you're at. That's more of a record keeping thing, and keeping good books. And then you've got
Okay.
the forward looking aspect of it, which is your projections and your monitoring, right? So um, the historical
Okay.
stuff kind of draws a line in the sand, and it says, this is how I have done so far. I've accumulated $100,000 or whatever the amount is. And
Hmm.
then the projection part of it is, I'm looking at the way I've been historically performing, and I can take that then and say, assuming things continue the way they have been, I will be able to generate another $100,000 in the next year.
Okay.
So it's important that you use realistic projections. I would, you know, obviously looking backwards and basing your future performance of that is never a guaranteed thing, but it gives you a pretty reasonable basis to start from, right? And if you
Okay.
plan to make improvements that are going to increase sales or going to decrease costs, and you want to incorporate those into your forecast and your budget, it's important that you take a conservative approach, right? If I think that I'm going to, increase my revenues by 50%, when I'm building my forecast, I should only say it's going to increase it by 30%, because you don't want to be making business decisions based on overly aggressive assumptions, because
Mm,
things many times don't materialize the way that we think that they're going to.
yeah. So you're talking about yeah, budgeting, which is essentially planning, right?
Yep.
All right. So with that said, what about the management of the receivables, account receivables, invoicing and collecting money from your customers or your vendors or
That's a critical thing for every business that offers terms. Businesses that operate on a cash basis, and when I use the term cash basis, I don't necessarily mean physical cash, but if I'm getting
uh-huh.
payments, when somebody purchases something, or payments when somebody purchases something in advance, whether it be credit card or check or
Hmm.
electronic payment, that's all
Hmm.
considered cash. But if you're in a situation where you're selling something to somebody and you're giving them, 30-day terms, it's really important that you stay on top of that. This kills a ton of companies, because they'll go
Yeah.
around and they'll create invoices and they'll send them out to people, and then they'll never follow up on them and make sure that they're
Yeah.
paid.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh,
And go ahead.
Very interesting. Yeah. Have you seen, in your experience, have you seen any of your clients encounter this kind of problem?
I see this all the time. This is probably one of the most common problems that I see
Really
with people. It is. And it
interesting.
kills your cash flow. It kills your cash flow, because what it does is, when you create that invoice and send it out, it shows in your books that you've made the revenue. So, everything is well and good. But if you're not collecting that money, that can become a very, very big problem.
Wow.
So one of the biggest issues that I've seen with companies is not promptly invoicing. I mean, I see
Okay.
this very, very frequently. So I go out and I perform a service for you, but I don't send you an invoice for it for a month or two later. People receive that invoice. If it's not fresh on their mind that, I was just working with Mark and he just performed this service for me, then I'm going to make sure I get it in my system and I'm going to pay it. But if a month or two goes by and I don't get the invoice and then it comes through, I'm going to be worried about other stuff at the time. So it kind of has a tendency to fall to the back burner. So that really slows your cash flow down. Another thing that I see frequently is, people may, promptly generate their invoices and send them out to people, but for whatever reason, the customers aren't paying them promptly. So it's important that you review your receivables on a frequent basis. I would say you should review your receivables, at the absolute minimum once a month, but I would actually do it multiple times throughout the month. And if you start to see people that are paying beyond terms, or, you start to see invoices getting late, just shoot them a quick email and say, hey, just wanted to check on the payment status of this invoice. I noticed that it was due last Tuesday. And that
Mm,
typically will get people to pay, right? Um,
okay.
if cash flow is a big issue, what I've seen some people do is, even prior to an invoice being due, you
Yeah.
can send out an email and say, hey, just wanted to remind you that this is due on Friday. Just wanted to make sure that you don't have any issues with, the invoice or anything. And then that will also speed people up.
Okay. All right. So you just mentioned about making projections, doing your budgeting, which is essentially some planning, and then we mentioned the receivables, and prompt invoicing, being clear about the payment terms, following up. So that brings us to the expenses. So how does what about expense management? How does that? What do you have to say about reviewing your
So
expenses?
So expense management is also a critical component of this whole thing. It's the one thing that you probably have the most control over is what you're spending your money on.
Uh,
More
yeah,
so than more so than what you're, generating from a revenue standpoint. You're reliant upon other people to,
yeah,
buy and pay the invoices and all that stuff, but you really do have the ability to manage your expenses. So again, a big part of that is knowing what they are. So that's a record keeping and a bookkeeping sort of
hmm hmm
situation. And when you're monitoring them, then you can see what you're spending on, and you can, identify what is necessary, what is not necessary. And as we grow as businesses, it's really easy to accumulate things that aren't necessary. So, I might be working on a project where I have to buy a new software for something,
yeah,
and I needed it at that time, but 6 months down the road, I might not need it anymore. So if you're regularly reviewing this stuff, then you see that on your books and you say, oh, well, shit, I'm not using that thing anymore. I could turn that off.
yes,
And these
yeah,
things have a tendency to accumulate over time, right? I
oh
mean,
yes,
I've been in business for, 15 years, and, it's like every once in a while you'll look at something and say, why am I paying for that? So that's why it's
yes.
important to review that stuff. And it's why it's important to use, your technology, your QuickBooks, things like that to help make it easier for you. Because if you're not seeing it, then you're not going to be in a spot where, you even know that you're spending this unnecessary money.
Okay, uh, so we've talked about the projections, and then we've talked about the account receivables and some of the expenses. What about the small businesses that have uh, goods or products? What about inventory management? What kind of advices do you have for people that have to deal with warehouses and lead times on their widgets and so forth?
I'm going to be kind of brief on this one for the purposes of this episode because we
Ah,
could dive really, really
okay.
deep into this one.
All right.
But for the people that are selling products and selling goods,
Mm-hmm.
there's a few things that we want to take into account. Just in time inventory. That's an instance where I'm only getting my inventory as I sell it, and I don't have a
Yeah.
big stockpile of stuff. That is a
Yes.
situation that really helps from your cash management.
Yeah.
If I'm selling t-shirts and I have to buy 1,000 of them at a time, then that's a big cash outlay. If I've got somebody that's printing those t-shirts and shipping them for me, then I'm basically just paying
One.
for them at the same time that I'm getting paid from my customer for them. So it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't require a big cash outlay. That's a pretty important strategy. That's a drop shipping type situation, and that
Mm-hmm.
is probably one of the better business models if you can get into a situation where you're doing that and you've got suppliers that are willing to do that, even if it costs you a little bit more on a per unit basis.
Hmm.
In the long run, it's going to help your cash flow because
Okay.
you don't have to pay all that money out up front.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like you mentioned, the t-shirt, having somebody hold your inventory or produce on an on-demand basis. Yeah, that's ideal. All right. So now that we've sort of defined this and then talked about the strategies uh, for dealing with it, what are the tools? So you mentioned QuickBooks. Discuss some of the tools that can assist with cash flow management. What do you recommend?
All right. So again, I kind of broke this into two things. It's the
Hmm.
you know the understanding and the knowledge of what
Hmm.
is happening and what has happened versus projecting and planning what you think is going to happen in the future. And so it's really two different set of tools that you're going to be able to do to manage
Ah,
both of these things.
okay. You say what is already happened and what is going to happen?
Yep, that's really the dividing line of how we manage cash flow. So
Okay.
your what has already happened, it's going to be your accounting software, it's going to be QuickBooks, it's going to be Zero, it's going to be FreshBooks, it's going to be whatever it is that you're using to do that.
Okay.
And they've all got really good tools that integrate with your bank and allow you to track and cut these expenses up and see where you're at, where your expenses are.
Mm.
So then moving on to the forward looking stuff, and a lot of these will actually integrate. The historical accounting software will integrate with forecasting software, so you can use the tools together to see where you're going in the future. So from a budgeting standpoint and a forecasting standpoint, we've already talked about some of these tools. One of them is Float, which is a great tool. It integrates with QuickBooks and Xero.
Okay.
And it actually, once you link it with your accounting software, it allows you to create forecasts based on your historical data. So that takes the legwork out of the process that I described earlier, and it
Yeah.
makes it more automated. And it gives you the ability to be able to change the assumptions, right? I mean, if I'm spending $100 a month on my cell phone bill and I know I'm going to be buying another cell phone, then it allows me to say, okay, well, it's going to be $200 a month now going forward.
Okay.
And then it creates forecasts and projections, and it says, you know, based on all of these assumptions, this is what I anticipate for the next 6 months. Another tool that you can use for this is an app called Pulse. It also integrates with programs, and it helps you keep track of your business expenses. So those are just two different options of, you know, tools that you can use to manage your forecasting and your projections.
Yeah. All right. So that's actually really nice. That was a excellent breakdown, and we've covered more or less every facet of this very important issue. Obviously, it's crucial. Effective cash flow management is crucial for the success and sustainability of any business. So, you know, if you're able to implement these strategies and utilize these tools, we think that's extremely both important and beneficial. So, with all of that said, what sort of as a kind of a closing thought, what other advice or recommendations or any other points you have for the small business person that's listening to us and wants to be proactive on cash flow management?
You know, I don't know that I have a lot of additional thoughts. I think we've done a pretty comprehensive view of
Yeah.
covering this.
Yeah.
This is, again, a situation where there are people that will help you do this stuff. It's what they do. I mean, my business, this has been one of the biggest things that I've helped my clients with over the years. If you're in a spot where you can
Hmm.
hire somebody to help you manage this stuff, I would recommend that you do it. It's money well spent.
Hmm.
And you know, when you do that, if you do that, make sure it's somebody that you've got a good working relationship with, and somebody that you can communicate with effectively, and help them be able to apply this stuff to your business. I guess
Yeah.
that's probably the final piece of information that I would do, is that, you know, hiring somebody to help you with this
Yeah.
is it can be a really good use of your money, and it frees you up to be able to run your business.
Yeah. That's right. It's probably something that we can do an entire discussion about, finding that right person, you know, qualities and how to vet them and so forth. We might remember that because I think that could be important to our listeners. Excellent, excellent stuff. Thanks very much for that, Mark. Really appreciate your expertise on this specific topic in particular. So, with all of that, I'd like to say thanks everybody for tuning in to SmartBiz Advisors. Remember, this is the place where we tackle all the important issues facing small business people and entrepreneurs out there. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media. We have lots of tips and insights. And remember, if there's anything you wish that we would talk about, send us an email. Let us know in the comments or via social media. And until next time, keep managing your cash flow effectively and stay ahead of the curve, everybody. Appreciate it. Take care and goodbye.